I want to show you an old Newsweek cover from almost 40 years ago. Exclusive, the untold story of campaign 1984. In there, you could read the magazine's fly-on-the-wall reporting from the Reagan versus Mondale presidential race, including the scoop that President Reagan's advisors were planning a tax hike after the election that they hadn't even told Reagan about. A looming tax hike does seem like something voters might want to have known about, so definitely worth the $2.50 newsstand price for the magazine. But here's the thing. That issue of Newsweek didn't come out until after the election. Part of the deal for the Newsweek reporters to get their access was that they would keep what they learned under wraps until after the election. A lot of journalists at the time were perhaps unsurprisingly mad at Newsweek, saying it was an ethical breach to withhold such important information. But the tempest passed. Fast forward to today, where we have been getting books from DC's top political reporters that reveal startling new details about the Trump White House and about alleged crimes, about clearly unpresidential behavior, and more. In 2020, it was Bob Woodward's book, revealing Trump knew how serious COVID was early on in the pandemic, while he downplayed it to the American public. Woodward had the president on tape from early February, but chose not to disclose it until his book Rage came out in September. It's gotten even worse since the 2020 election. One book, one bombshell revelation after another about the former president and his various lies, scandals, and abuses of power. Maggie Haberman, the famed New York Times Trump whisperer, as she's sometimes called, for the past 7 years, is finally out with her new Trump book. It's called Confidence Man. And it's out this week. And it too reveals some info that might have been useful to know a long time ago, like how Donald Trump may have stolen government documents. He may have stolen government documents when he left office in January 2021. This is from the epilogue of Confidence Man. He demurred when I asked if he had taken any documents of note upon departing the White House. Nothing of great urgency, no, he said, before mentioning the letters that Kim Jong-un had sent him, which he had showed off to so many Oval Office visitors that advisors were concerned he was being careless with sensitive material. You were able to take those with you, I asked. He kept talking, seeming to have registered my surprise, and said, no, I think that's in the archives, but most of it is in the archives. But the Kim Jong-un letters, we have incredible things. Seems kind of important now, that conversation of hers with Trump almost a year before the FBI search of Mar-a-Lago. Haberman's is just the latest Trump book to raise the question. Why do so many DC journalists appear to sit on huge revelations, especially Trump-related revelations, until they're published in a book, instead of putting them out immediately? Newspapers are dying, faith in the media is at an all-time low, and the best-positioned journalists are holding their cards until the lucrative book launch? That's how it looks and sounds to many. There's been a lot of scrutiny on Haberman, and it has an added dimension. Her years of access to Trump and her reporting, sometimes sympathetic, sometimes devastating, has gotten a lot of criticism from liberals and conservatives alike. According to former GOP strategist Steve Schmidt, who co-founded the Never Trump Lincoln Project, Haberman is, quote, a singular totem of corruption, just like Trump chasing money over justice. That's nonsense, says MSNBC columnist and former Democratic speechwriter Michael A. Cohen. In Haberman's case, he says, none of this info was especially new or groundbreaking. And he adds, reporters often get that info from sources by promising they'll wait to publish it. Cohen asks, quote, if a reporter tells a source one thing and does another, who will trust them in the future? So, in an unprecedented age of division, distrust and disinformation, how should these reporters navigate their obligations to their sources, their bosses, and to you, the American public? Joining me now, Steve Schmidt, former advisor to the George W. Bush and John McCain presidential campaigns, also a co-founder of the Lincoln Project and author of the Warning newsletter on Substack, and Michael A. Cohen, MSNBC columnist, former State Department speechwriter during the Obama years, and author of the Truth and Consequences newsletter on Substack. Thank you both for joining me. Steve, lay out your case for what you think reporters are doing wrong with their books and why. And if they were really holding back from the publications they work for, wouldn't we be hearing it from their top editors?
I think that when this argument devolves to whether reporters writing a book is a good thing or not, it's evidence that we are, in fact, living in an idiocracy. Here's what the issue is. The reporter, what is their responsibility when we're talking about the top political reporters in a society? And what I would argue it is It is to hold government accountable. And in essence, what they are self-declaring the power to do is to take information and to harvest it like nuggets, and ultimately to commoditize it, commoditizing information, putting a value on it. Some of that information is available for release tomorrow for the public. Some of it is withheld for the book later. Who gets to decide that? Now, the New York Times specifically, in this case, calls itself the paper of record. Now, the New York Times as an institution judged against the collapse of trust, faith, and belief in the news, in the media companies, the fact that it's a powerful billion-dollar company, that Haberman is a celebrity million-dollar-a-year journalist, reporter. Are these people immunized from any public criticism? I see an inherent conflict of interest. I also see a conflict when you have a reporter who's referred to by the president she's covering as his psychiatrist. And what she did on a daily basis, and what happens every day, is the bestowment of anonymous sourcing on people that she knows to be not credible in the White House. Everybody knew the president read the New York Times about him, and what the White House officials did was jockey for favor with Haberman in a broad trading of information and tidbits that are, as I just said, later commoditized. And I think that all of it adds to a collapse of trust and faith and belief in media, which fuels the political instability in the country.
Okay, case made. Michael, let's hear you respond to some of that.
I don't know what to say about that. I mean, half the things, the bad things we know about Donald Trump, we know because of Maggie Haberman and the New York Times and the Washington Post and other elite media sources. I think it's a sort of a crazy notion to say that she's holding material in check for her book when so many stories over the past 7 years about Trump were broken by Haberman and by other Times reporters. And the thing is about this story that I find sort of bizarre is, you know, Steve, you tweeted something about her keeping quiet the fact that Trump said he didn't want to leave office. He told her, I'm not going to leave office. Well, when did she know that? We don't know when she knew that. If she knew that in November of 2020, I'm sure she would have reported that because it's a major news story. But she found it out after January 20th, 2021. It's not as big a news story because we actually saw that take place. So most of what has come out from her book that I've seen so far is, I don't want to say it's gossip. I don't want to reduce what she's written. I'm sure it's a wonderful book. I haven't read it yet. But there's a lot of material that we already knew. There's a story about Trump misidentifying Democratic congressional aides who are African-American and Hispanic as being waiters. Oh, Donald Trump's a racist? Wow, I mean, knock me over with a feather. I mean, we know this about Donald Trump. It's not
Michael,
like
let me jump in and ask you a quick question, because I take your point, and there has been an argument about when did they find out this information, when would it have mattered? Let me just give you a hypothetical, just to get where you stand on principle. If Roger Sollenberger of the Daily Beast, who is reporting that Herschel Walker paid for an abortion, something Walker denies, huge story this week, if he held that back until after the Senate election for a biography of Herschel Walker, would you be okay with that?
Well, no, but why would he do that? I mean, he wants that scoop. Every reporter wants a scoop. And that scoop, frankly, and he's gotten amazing scoops, Herschel Walker, you know, is going to possibly lead to a book deal down the road for him. I don't get the incentive here to keep this stuff quiet. I mean, Maggie Haberman's not going to sell books 2 years after the fact because she, you know, revealed that Donald Trump said in November 2020 he wasn't going to leave the White House. We knew that already. No one's buying the book because of that. They're buying the book because she has special insight into Trump nobody else has. And that's what makes her an effective reporter.
Steve, you were very critical of the New York Times a moment ago. I just had New York Times White House correspondent Peter Baker on this show on Tuesday. He and his wife, New Yorker reporter Susan Glasser, just wrote their own big Trump book that reveals lots of things, like he considered trading Puerto Rico for Greenland. White House staffers openly worried about his mental health. I asked Peter Baker about the criticisms of reporters holding back for their books. Have a listen to what he said, Steve.
Well, first of all, I would say that all the reporting that's new in this book was done after he left office, okay? We didn't hold anything back while he left office that people needed to know before the election. And by the way, he did lose the election. So any new revelations before the election wouldn't have changed the outcome if your hope was that he was going to lose. He did lose. Now, if there's something truly urgent that has to be out immediately, we do put that in the newspaper, and don't hold that back for a book.
Steve, is he wrong?
Well, I think that each case is situational, that you can't apply a generalized standard to different cases. In the case of Haberman, I think that you're talking about, the lead White House correspondent for the New York Times, and who gets to decide what information is commoditized for later. So we began the segment by looking at Maggie Haberman standing in front of photo op signs, celebrifying, if that's a word, the launch of the book. The motive for it is obviously, if you package a book, so some of this old news, for example, where she's a contributor at CNN, is billed as breaking news on CNN, even though the news is years old. And what I'm saying is, it's not on the level. The collapse of trust and faith and belief in the media in America is a very real thing. The fact that people don't believe anything.
Steve, when you talk about trust, Steve, I'm just going to jump in and ask you, Steve, when you talk about trust, you worked on multiple campaigns. Did you never do deals with reporters on the side saying, I'll give you this, but you can't report it yet? Really?
Absolutely. I negotiated all the times in every conceivable status with reporters, off the record, background, deep background, so on and so forth. All of the reporters that were writing books about campaigns, or the magazine journalists that were doing it, most of them had an understanding, hey, very specifically, I'm writing for a book later. I'm not reporting news day to day. There was no confusion about what their role was. My point is this: is the information valuable? It's valuable because there's a commercial product at the end that is marketed as such.
Okay, we're out of time, Steve. I want to give Michael one last word on this. Michael, 30 seconds. It's all yours. 30 seconds. The floor is yours.
Wrote a book called Game Change with lots of revelations. They also covered the race on a day-to-day basis. I mean, I just think what minimizes trust in journalists is when these kinds of attacks that I think are deeply unfair and deeply misunderstand how journalism works. There's just no evidence that Maggie Haberman kept stories secret to sell a book. That's an allegation people are making that I don't want much
Maggie Haberman.
We will have to. This is a great conversation. I wish we had more time, but we are out of time, which is very frustrating. Steve Schmidt, Michael Cohen, thank you for coming on and having the discussion. Appreciate you both.